Hello, welcome everyone. We have a couple of new names on the call this week, so let's start with some introductions. Sergey, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sorry. Hi. Hello, my name is Sergey. I'm working on the reliability team in Google. So I'm software engineer. I'm not sure what actually I can disclose here in this meeting. I'm pretty new.
All right, thanks, Sergey, and welcome to the group. And Jis? Doesn't seem muted, but we aren't hearing anything. Well, maybe we can do this a bit later, or do you wanna speak for Jis, Dan, since you know them?
Yeah, Gis is on our performance team. I think probably Gis and Young probably have a lot of interesting things to talk about. They're both working on sort of performance benchmarks and tools like that. I'm sure Gis could do a much better explanation or introduction himself once he gets his microphone worked out.
All right, thanks for that, Dan. So just if you're ready later on in the call, just feel free to interject. So on a bus, okay, thank you. So we had the OCP summit last week. Does anyone want to do some highlights or a debrief or interesting points what happened last week? I wasn't there, obviously.
I was there. I was there for only one day, so I picked Wednesday when we had some representation of our different talks. I did make a few of them, and really want to thank everybody who sort of pitched the OCP test and validation. At a high level, there was no new real explicit theme that I walked away from OCP in terms of hardware technology. It was still liquid cooling, high bandwidth memory theme, obviously a lot of Gen AI and AI themed trends. In terms of test and validation, I think we definitely got some footprint, especially in the talks, by Google, by Microsoft, and Meta. So on the SSD representation, Arun did a great job as well talking about it in the context of OSF. So I would say for me personally, for this one single day, the takeaways were a lot of a continuation from last year, with clearly a need from the industry to get into this east-west traffic for training large AI models, and sort of the uncertainty around how the hardware is going to meet that demand. So CXL remained a theme, and we're starting to see a little bit of quantum computing presence in OCP. So that was my single day bit of takeaway. I definitely missed a lot of talks. Happy to hear from others as well, but it was really a good event, very large attendance. So it was surprising that they cut back on some rooms. A bit of a bummer we didn't get a chance to have our own slot, but it was a good event.
I was new to OCP. I attended for a day and a half, and maybe I'll have a little bit of a contrarian view that I felt that it was very scattered. There were many different, or way too many tracks. So it was not possible to follow the different tracks. And I think that the theme did overshadow the problems and the technology. I don't care to hear from an optical vendor how the optical modules are going to change the world of AI. I want to know OSNR of that module. I want to know how it plugs in, how to cool that thing. And everybody was kind of trying to place themselves in the Gen AI forefront, which realistically is true, but we didn't need to hear from every single vendor that they were a part of the AI race. So I felt it was very heavy on marketing, very shallow on technology.
Okay. Yeah, I agree, Francesco. I've been there for 3 days, so I was mainly one of Microsoft's schools. So I was representing virtual client. And first, I want to also echo what you saw. Like there's lots of companies there, like maybe around 30 to 40, like plus that are showcasing their technologies and to do maybe what you're said like marketing. But I also see lots of companies like Meta, and Ampere, like Microsoft. They are not exactly marketing. They actually want to help and showcasing, explaining their technologies. And in my own personal opinion, like Meta was super cool, huge displays and showcasing both the server hardware, the infrastructure, and also Meta's commitment to like the environments, like how much memory, how much power it's consuming and what's the efficiency, and it's like water neutral and carbon neutral commitment. That's like super fun to listen to. I listened to the Microsoft executive talks on virtual client. I went to uh Bhushan and Vishal talk on the GPU firmware deployments. They think they are both very well received, had good amount of audience, and I will be glad to broadcast them once the recording comes out. On the Microsoft booth side, we had the virtual client, which is which fits the OCP TNV theme, so it's the workflow automation. In case people like new people here doesn't know, and we have the Calyptra, which is the root of trust module for GPU and other firmware. It also has the Open Rack chassis module, which is for like modularizing some of the either FPGA or other components that you can plug in on the chassis. And also the 1.6T networking, like a super networking cable. Overall, I learned a lot. It's the first time I've been to OCP, and to me, I received very positively. And yeah, looking forward to learn more from other members that went to the conference. And Vincent, at first time I met Vincent in person, I was super excited. Yeah, like great energy, and I learned a lot from it.
Thanks, Young, and thanks for all of the opinions so far. I would like to ask a bit more of a specific question, which is of interest for this group. And maybe this isn't for right now, like live, but something to think about, whether the in-person people who are in person at the summit, whether we have identified some other opportunities of collaborating with other people or vendors or anything like that. So if there's something on that account, feel free to mention or add it to some list to the agenda, and we can pursue it. Go ahead, Venkat.
Yeah, along the lines of so future opportunities and stuff. Actually, this is more a question for Yang. So the OCP CTAM initiative, and in general, the GPU diagnostics, there was a lot of like good momentum around that work from Bhushan and others in Microsoft. I understand that's being tracked in a separate kind of a forum, right? Like I'm wondering if there's any plan to merge that into the TNV effort, or because I think in general, accelerator kind of diagnostics and compliance tools could be like a good future area for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't work closely with Usha, but I know they like the code base. It's in the OCP diet, so I would believe it's being merged, or like almost completely, right? So yeah, it will be part of OCP diet, and if there's other modules, I think other than GPU, I imagine also be OCP diet, so it will fit right in OCP TV.
So I can add to that a bit. So Venkat, I know we were investigating the CTAM repo a couple of weeks ago, and it may be of use inside Meta. Your question is better handled by Bhushan, as Young just mentioned, or Rajat. Like Rajat, I know is working on the technical side of things. So if you want to get in contact with them, just let me know and we can set up an email or something. Go ahead, Francesco.
So I spoke with Stera Lab about LMT. They were interested, so we might get some collaboration from them. Actually, prior to OCP, I have spoken with Candubas about the same, and they're also coming out with some PCIe devices. So they also are interested. I spoke with AWS. They're also interested. I don't know if they're going to be joining this or not yet, but they are looking at LMT. And then I was trying to get someone from Oxide Computers. If anybody knows anyone there, so there's a guy at Oxide that created an LMT version in Rust, and right now it's actually difficult to get it to work, so I wasn't able to test it out yet. But I know that Rust might be a preferential code basis for the future. So if he's willing to jump in, maybe we can. That's a way to start from scratch using his Rust implementation.
So I know someone who may know someone from Oxide. So I'll get to that and let you know if I
Yeah,
find
I saw a guy that had a sticker from Oxide at the Open Firmware Foundation, but he no longer worked there. So
yeah, I'll look into that. Go ahead, Vincent.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that Brian Cantrell did a great interview of our dear Ron Minnick. I know Ron is no longer at Google, but that's definitely a connection. Ron used to call into these meetings in the early days. But for general intent, if you haven't listened to that interview, it's really awesome.
who is Brian?
Brian Cantrell is the host of Oxide podcast.
Ah, okay.
He's the founder of Oxide Computing.
Yeah.
Oh, you know him?
Interview.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're still in touch with Ron, Dan, but he could be a direct connection there.
Yeah, I can reach out to him. Actually, I actually just saw him a couple weeks ago. Not related to work, but.
While I've got the mic open, just a quick comment. Francesco, to your point on OCP and Yang being there the first time, it is very chaotic. OCP is an interesting industry event. It borders between deep technical and very marketing fluff. I completely agree. I've been there for many years now. And it's got this weird non-academic vibe to it, but it tries to have the academic vibe. It's really sitting in between. And it's very confusing. If you're expecting an academic kind of conference, with booth, it's not that. If you're expecting kind of a vendor supply sales pitch, it's not that either. It takes a lot of preparation to really get the most out of the conference. And I've found that the years that I've gotten the most out of it, which wasn't really this year, but is when I put a lot of time in planning which event I'm going to go to and who I'm going to talk to, because otherwise it's very overwhelming. Karen.
Yeah. So the one thing I took from it is well, besides what you've been saying, is that they're starting to become certifications in some of the presentations. I think it was a security certification in one of the earlier presentations. There was also an SSD certification. And when I think of certifications, they need to have a standard of how you create the diagnostics for those certifications. And anywhere we hear the word certification, we should be reaching out to those particular groups and asking, can we have the diagnostic output as the format that we use for those certifications? The second thing I was thinking was we can opportunistically decide who we talk to about adopting the OCP standard, or we can be scientific. So each of us has a list of ODMs that we use. Each of us has a list of tooling, people that provide the tooling. Each of us has, our own processes internally. And maybe by being more systematic about who we'd like to adopt, that we could target who we approach to intentionally choose where we want to get the value out of this rather than just because there's an opportunity put in front of us. Those were the things that I took from this.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond as well, Francisco. Like your observation is prescient, right? And I think Kieran's comments, if I could piggyback on them a little bit, is the way I think about OCP. Like when you look at it, because it's definitely not like supercomputing 2023. That's not that kind of conference, right? It's sort of broken down between people that want to sell things to people providing services and people that want to buy things from those people that are providing services, right? And I think what Karen was mentioning is sort of like, how do those two groups work together well, right? And it's that sort of certification process, and where we come in, whether it be a benchmark to verifying that you're reaching some type of performance criteria, or a hardware diagnostic to say that you're reaching some type of health or MTBF limit or something like that, right? That's where I think all of these things really kind of come together, and we make it easier to sell things to us, right, that we want to buy, so that we don't have to design them. Hopefully, all the participants here, Google and Meta and our friends at Microsoft and maybe eventually AWS, HP, we can get standards on what we want to make it easier for those people. And then we can give them a set of tests that say, hey, you've delivered what we want, right? We're ready to buy it. I think success for me, or success from my old boss's point of view, was that we can go off and we can order an OCP part number, right? It shows up just like I'm buying something, off the shelf at Best Buy or something like that. That's one of the places that we want to get to. We're still, a long way from that, because we have a lot of things that are very, very custom. And we want to try to get rid of those custom things where we can, right? So I think, everything you said is spot on. I think it's accurate, but I think it highlights why we're doing all this and where we want to go.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, on that note, Dan, actually, there was an interesting talk by the DMTF that raised sort of the standardization. It was relating to GPU compliance, but they talked about MCTP quite a bit on the host management side. And after the talk, there was an individual that came up and asked a pretty interesting, raised an important observation around a lot of the work being done there, also echoed in the PCI SIG. And so he seemed a little bit frustrated, to be honest, but I think he was just making the point of like, hey, we should be aligning these two initiatives. The takeaway for me was around our initiative. How do we take that step as well in terms of aligning and growing the diagnostic standard to rally in other forums, such as DMTF, which we've been talking about for a while? It's more a thought that it kicked in than really an action. I don't think we've absolutely convinced ourselves we would go that route, but it was interesting to see that being discussed at the event, and I think it's one of the value add of having these talks.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, the area that this surface itself sort of most glaringly is the fact that we have the DMTF and sort of the Redfish standard and all that good stuff. And then we have a device monitoring and telemetry track, right, which is proposing something completely different. And then, of course, we have our standard, which tries to bring those together and abstract on top of them, right? Because we all have slightly different requirements, right, between sort of passive fleet monitoring and sort of like beating on the thing with the diagnostic where you need like basically zero latency for a lot of these things, right? It's just everything's kind of like developed organically. One of the things I've told my team is that at Google, I think we've looked at success at OCP is like we've been proposing a lot of standards, or we're sort of open sourcing this and putting this out there and things like that. And I'm like, why don't you look at that sort of a 180 point of view? Like, what have you managed to take? What have you managed to not have to do, right? What have you been managed to like internalize or standardize with another team, right? It kind of goes back to what I've been saying before about broadcasting code versus open sourcing code, right? And I think, we still have a lot of space to move in this area. We've had some successes like Kubernetes and things like that, but I think Meta historically has probably done a better job than us in these areas, right? It's one thing we want to do a better job of.
Well, that's what we're here for. Okay. Let's change topics a bit. I would do a quick status. And
I'm sorry. May I interrupt? I have another minor topic I want to talk about the summit. Because you asked whether we observe other opportunities with some other booths or talks. There's a booth called AMI, or the company is called AMI. I'm not sure if other members here went to that booth. They are building They are building like data center reimaging and test automations with a sort of like a modular approach. It will be commercial. They will be selling that solution. But what they demonstrate is they have like different imaging approach with like UV and other mechanism or VHD, and they also have like redfish connections and also other tests like automated test capabilities. So it might be something I don't know we may want to talk because they certainly they are very open to discuss and showcase some of this. But at the end, I believe they will sell this.
Right. That's a good point. Dan was asking on chat, what is the name?
AMI, yes, exactly.
So with AMI, like
yeah,
the
that's
BIOS
spelled correctly.
thing?
Yeah, that's spelled correctly.
Okay.
Alpha Motel,
And,
right? Okay, that is spelled correctly. Thank you.
okay. And do we have a contact there, or maybe let me rephrase the question? Would you like to pursue this and get it going?
Sure. Yes, I took some photos of I have their contact. But let's talk offline what exactly I should talk with them.
Okay.
Yeah,
No
not
worries.
very good with these communications. They're called Americans Mega Thread. But
Yeah, it's the BIOS company.
Oh,
I remember it. It's AMI, right?
Yes, we know them very well.
okay. Then yeah. So let me know what I should do. I'm just sharing what I saw.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and it is a good company to onboard onto this because they obviously have this, and we have a lot of contact with them already.
So are they people that would be worthwhile adding to hardware fault management as well, that are introducing? So if there's a meeting that's another group that they would be useful for.
Probably, but I would say let's get the ball rolling at least. Some introductions, maybe invite someone from AMI. Maybe invite
Okay.
someone from AMI in the call here to get some more info on that, and then we can talk about other projects. Does that make sense, Karen?
Yeah, that works.
I wouldn't be surprised that Arun's been working with them closely with the OSFCI. So I'm sure if he was here, he would have something to say. So Young, if you want to ping Arun offline, he may already be working with them. It's not impossible, I would say, but I would imagine he has some context in addition to what others here may have.
Okay. I'm sorry, which Arun?
Aaron Koshi. I'll set up a Slack channel for this discussion, and I'll add you, Young and Aaron, and we can continue there.
Okay.
Yeah, if Ram Nenich was here, he'd probably have an opinion as well.
Okay. Maybe I regret for bringing this up.
May I remind you that this is recorded? Okay, thanks, Yang. So let's do a quick status, and we have some stuff on the agenda, and if we have remaining time after that, we can continue with these topics. Status, Igor, you are first and the only on the status. I'll name some people after you.
Hi everyone. So I have some news about memtester. I wrapped it up and I created a pull request, so people who are invited to review it. So if you are interested, please review it, and then we can merge it into the master branch. I haven't finished all the features I wanted to include in memtester, but it's in a usable and fully working condition right now. So I think it makes sense to merge the first version. For some reason, I could only invite a limited number of people to review it. I don't know why. Maybe it's based on some membership in some organization. Yeah, if there is no interest in reviewing the code, then I can just merge it because there is no requirement to review it in the GitHub settings.
So, Igor, if you post the link to the PR in the agenda here, anyone can actually go and add comments to the PR. They may not be able to accept or all of that, but they can add comments.
Okay, sure, we'll do that. Yeah, that's it about memtest.
Very nice. Thank you, Igor. I don't have other people in the status, so let me throw in a couple of names. Young, do you have any updates on VC? Need any help?
No, not yet. So we are we are working heavily on some of the internal validations for some of the Azure hardware. So we're quite busy at the moment. But yeah, I've keep been working on this. And if this group has any workloads that you would like to see automated, just raise an issue, or email me. Let us know. We are keep improving MLperf and some of the other workloads that Dan mentioned a couple times ago. Yeah, and I would love to discuss with Jess here. It sounds like he or she is working on a similar solutions. Dan?
Young, the question had come up. I know you've been busy with the summit and obviously working on more urgent tasks, but when we would have the wrapper for sort of the Milton interface for the benchmarks, we were wanting to incorporate that into our next phase of qualification that we're working on here so that we could try out some of those performance benchmarks along with some of the one that we already use internally as well.
Of course. So I added the wrapper in a private branch with the schema, but it's not automated. I'm still working on a merged solution. When does that sort of start? When do you need to test it out?
We're hoping to have it by December is when everything's going to come together. But obviously sooner the better, right?
Of course, I understand. Okay, I understand. Let me give you more update next week. I would
Okay,
say
and fair enough.
maybe another 2 weeks. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries at all, man. Like I said, it's all everything that we all do here for the most part is, you know, in addition to everything else you do, right?
Yes, I understand. So when you say the validation, is that for Google or it's like the OCP lab at Lenovo?
What we're planning to do is do it first internally at Google. It's a process that we're calling Plumus right now. And then we'd like to also open it up more broadly as well. There's sort of different stages without going into it, but the first stage is sort of like completely open source tooling and everything else that we can go and run. The idea being that if we were ever to go to an off-the-shelf server or sort of an OCP server, like we've already got a set of benchmarks and compliance and everything that we can go and run. And then there's progressive layers that we put on top of it where we have our own management stack, which we call Borg, and then obviously, you know, our cloud computing layer and everything else, which we can't share those parts. But that sort of base layer, the OS level, if you will, what we call the node layer, that's something we'd be interested in open sourcing.
Okay, and when you see the Melton interface, is the same thing as OCP diag schema, or it's slightly different?
You got it. No, it's the same. So OCP diag standard, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you then.
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks for the update, Young. Now, based on the other people that I see on the call, I would ask maybe Francesco or Hua, do you maybe have any progress on the mapping of the output of the LMT tool?
I know that Hua and Satish have met a couple of times. The second time I was not there, so Hua, do you have anything?
No, I don't. Yeah, it's been busy with other things. Yeah, just last time we left it at how we kind of model the concept of the link or the component, what
Okay.
maps to whether it points to an endpoint device or something, a PDF, or I think it should model a link.
Yes.
Which is maybe we can, and then what would we use to you know, identify the link? We can use a bus number, or we can use 2BDF, or the root port and endpoint, or so we left the discussion there last time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Hua and Francesco. So we're kind of on the same discussion right now, right?
Yeah. On the tool itself, I did actually create 2 new requests that we will fix. The first one is related to requiring a flag in order to run on devices that do not support the independent sampler. I actually took down a bunch of servers internally while doing a test. So that's a good flag to have. The second one is this tool wasn't working well with a Broadcom switch, and that's because the Broadcom switch, different from other devices, required a no command before inquiring about its capability, its LMT capability. So we were able to figure that out, and it's an easy fix, but that needs to be fixed.
Yeah. In my case, I just sprinkle no comments all over the place.
Yeah.
This reminds me of working on firmware. It's like if you don't know what it's doing, wait a bit. Yeah, put a sleep in it. Okay, so on that topic, do we need like another call to discuss that, like the one that we had last time at Google, or do we continue the discussion on the GitHub page? What do you think?
We probably should have another call, but Satish is in India, so when he gets back, I think in a couple of weeks, I think that's a good time.
Okay, go ahead,
I
Dan.
want to ask if anyone has strong opinion or any idea, thoughts on how we do this. Yeah, because from my point of view, over and over again, people kind of too soon pointing finger at that one particular component when the LMT test fail. They always think it's the new device or new design, but the PCI is actually a integration of multiple components. So we want to not give people this false idea that this test or failure from this test attribute to one component. We should have some sort of integration type of modeling concept.
Dan, you have your hand raised. Is that hold on you? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Wallace's comment. If we're using the tool for validation, which is our primary use case right now, I don't have any strong feeling around like how we do the endpoint modeling. If we go ahead and say that it's two basically end devices and we use that to indicate sort of the line segment between them, right? If we're using it for like a repair or data center diagnostic, though, that's where, we probably do need to say, hey, it's one of these three components where we would need like a list of targeted things associated with it. But I think since our use case right now is validation, I'm okay with what was proposed from the first time we met. I wasn't there at the second meeting. Did you get any pushback or any concerns about that, though?
Sorry, what was the first proposal? Like that
we would basically
remember
two endpoints.
So
that's the device.
There was a bit more to that after you left, Dan.
Okay.
So it is the two endpoints, but the subcomponent is like the endpoint on the lane, the receiver endpoint on the lane, and then coordinates for the actual test scenario right now.
That seems logical to me.
Yeah, and the component was the link. Let me reply a bit to your question, Dan. Sorry, I'm jumping in. You asked about concerns. We're kind of in the beginning with things, and we don't have a lot of examples and prior art as to how to map hardware and hardware physical components onto the spec. So I'm in that discussion as well. I'm kind of trying to guide this towards a thing that we can reuse or offer as guidance later on. So even in this scenario, even if we're okay with the validation use case versus the repairs case, I still think it should make sense from a bigger, larger viewpoint, so that we can also accomplish the goal of using this as an example.
Okay.
Go ahead, Francesco.
So I think that one thing that we kind of agreed is the fact that the BDF is the way that we need to use to interact with the measurement itself. So the layer on top is actually what we are talking about, which is how do we go from a component model to the BDF. And that should, in my mind, be decoupled. The BDF will become then the input of the measurement itself. On the blaming of a failure, my take is always, I worked in semiconductor for many years, and the receiver, which is wherever you're counting the errors, is always blamed for everything. So this LMT tool is no different, but there is at least one super important place where it's going to help determine where the problem might be, and that's when the retimer exists. When the retimer doesn't exist, the best you can do is parity, and even that one is actually something that people have not used. Linux doesn't handle it well, it doesn't clear that bit, so we are looking at parity as well, but in determining whether to swap a cable or swap a board or reset a component on a board, that's where that determination of is it in the first part of the link or the second part of the link where in between there is a retimer. I think that that's an extremely important thing everywhere. But in terms of the link, how good it is, whether it's the transmit setting, the equalization going wrong, the receive algorithm going astray, that part, I think, is something where the tool is going to expose the problems, but as an industry, we will have to continue to solve each problem one by one.
Yeah, I did. Sorry to jump ahead. I did want to say one thing. We have kind of stuck with the guidance that the diag does say where the problem was observed, not what it thinks is the root cause of the problem. Like we view that as a separate sort of diagnostic function.
Yes, Francisco. Yeah, you brought up a good point. That's where this whole thing came up from, the retimer, because there's no BDF associated with a retimer, right? So you actually test retimer from the root port, so how do we identify the retimer as a component when the link fails? You don't know whether it could be root or endpoint retimer, right? So
if you remember, we talked about this in that discussion, in the last discussion, and my proposal was that the cards, the endpoints are identified by the BDF, the retimers are identified by the baseboard. So the component is the baseboard and the retimer is the subcomponent of the baseboard. But anyway, we don't need to go into that much detail right now and in this call with everyone. I think that we could use another call like the first one. I don't remember who set that up initially. Maybe it was you, Dan, but regardless, I can start an email and we can set up another call to talk about this one specifically. Go ahead, Dan.
At the risk of one final comment on this, and then I'll drop it. The only concern I've got with the baseboard approach, like you're unquestionably correct. That is the right thing to do, right? But if we include that, then it sort of puts the burden of a hardware model on top of the LMT tools, which, from our experience with the hardware abstraction layer and all the other things that, we're working on, that's like a larger effort than the LMT tool itself. That's the only concern I've got about bringing that in, right? Like that's been very, very complicated for us. And we're trying to find a way to open that up. And we think Redfish is probably the only open way to do it. But, trying to take the Redfish sort of physical device model and then map it to all the PCIe lanes is, it's non-trivial. End of I don't know, gripe or diatribe or whatever that was.
Okay, so we'll cover this detail as well in that other call, because when I say baseboard, I think a bit more abstractly, not specifically how to identify that. But anyway, so I'll take an action to start the email on that. We have a couple of things on the agenda and we have like a couple more minutes left. So I think that should be enough. Igor, you are first with an item. If you want to go ahead.
I wanted to revisit that topic that I discussed a few weeks ago about hardware and software info. So according to the spec, for some reason, we include these infos in the .info. And it feels like we are limiting ourselves by doing that, because extracting software and hardware info may be a separate step, for example, with its own logs or with its own diagnosis, right? And by including hardware info and software info into that info, we are basically depriving ourselves of having a separate test step. Because right now, everything like extracting the info has to be done before you start a test step. So shouldn't we instead emit hardware or software info as a separate artifact that may refer to certain test step or test run?
I can start on this, and maybe you have one opinion then as well. From what I remember in the discussions that we've had here, we decided that the hardware discovery should be done before any test runs start or test steps. So I kind of get the feeling that this is an issue with the implementation of the mem tester thing, because it's a wrapper on top of a binary that you need to run multiple times in order to do this hardware discovery bit. But ideally, we want to separate the discovery and failure to discovery from the actual exercise of the test and measurements.
Oh, I see. So what about, for example, a I2C device that you need to connect to and talk to extract hardware or software info, like firmware info from the device? Then this connection and talking to that device may cause a failure where you report certain logs.
Right.
With the current approach, you cannot report logs. So how do you do that
can.
then?
You can. So you can. We have discussed this, and if you look at the samples that I wrote in the Python API, there is one specifically which says failure at hardware discovery step can be reported in this way. Because at the end of the day, if you need to talk to the I2C device or whatever else, and that fails, that is not a failure. That is not a failure of a test itself, but rather in this pre-step that you're discovering hardware.
Okay. Let me take a look at that.
We wanna like separate the classes of failures just to be more precise. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to say, Igor, originally I felt the exact same way you did. I was definitely of the same opinion, and Yuan Lin and Shufeng kind of brought me around to their way of thinking, and I'm kind of convinced now that their model is the right one. I'll see if I can find some old emails and documents where we kind of were debating this back and forth, and it might be interesting. I'll see if I can dig them up.
Yeah, that would be interesting to read and understand. Thank you.
Okay. Does that answer your question in full, Igor?
I don't know. I need to read the documents and see, but I have some materials to read now, so yeah.
Okay. But for your immediate concern right now, I suppose
Right.
enough. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, when we were putting together the spec, even on this call, I remember we talked about this quite a bit, right? We even went back and forth amongst ourselves. So it's a very fair concern, but I think, you always run into the chicken and egg problem. Like, if you don't have them all up front, right, then you can't report against them anyway. And sort of to the points that Adrian was making, right?
I will add one more short thing because I think this is relevant feedback. So Igor, after you study the spec and the samples and stuff that you can find relevant for this, if you still feel like something is missing, you should report that so we can add it to the spec.
All right.
No, thank you. Now, George, you wanna talk about the Python wrapper export?
Yeah. So at Google, we're talking about exporting our hardware abstraction layer in Python. So the question comes up, like, where do we put it? Because our repo right now is all C++, and Meta's repo is Python. So it would be confusing to have like a separate Python, Google Python repo. So I wanted to float the idea of putting it all in one repo, just call it a C++ repo, where the Python wrapper is just like very thin PyBind layer, but it's all essentially C++ underneath. I wanted to see if there's any like objections or thoughts on that.
So when you say put it all in one repo, you are still referring to everything that is based on the C++ slash protobuf implementation, right?
Exactly right.
All right. We've had this discussion before, by the way, and Dan just left, but he had some context on this. You know, as I was saying on the Slack chat, I think this is fine. What I would like to do is like present a uniform API to the users. So I need to look into whether we can combine these in PyPy in such a way that you can like modularly install them and they would come with like different dependencies, but you use the same module name. So when you say import HWY, you get the SOs and everything that is native. But if you don't want that, you don't get the SOs. You only get the native Python. And as I was saying, you know, a concern for that is precompiled binaries have like this bit of, you know, concern, security concern for companies that code is not audited, or at least it doesn't have a good trace of the source it was compiled from. It obviously, because it's compiled, it's hard to check. But that's my opinion. If anyone else wants to say something on this, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on this. I think the bigger question in my mind is whether the hardware abstraction interface is to coexist within OCP TV as a whole. So, you know, on the Slack channel, George, my view was until we kind of all recognize that this is where it really belongs, I would see the hardware abstraction being sort of part of the diagnostic code. And I realize, you know, you made a very good point that, yeah, it's very redundant, definitely not a very clean way to go. But I felt that this needed a bigger discussion. I don't know how others feel, you know, obviously within the group. We never settled entirely on both the parametrization model as well for the input and on the hardware abstraction. So that's why I think this is this needs a bit more than a few minutes to discuss, I think.
Yeah, so we're kind of on time, but I have a quick question which I find relevant for this. George, what are the inputs and outputs as a black box of the hardware abstraction interface?
The inputs are protobuf requests. You can think of it almost like an RPC service, protobuf inputs and outputs. The one API that corresponds directly to the spec is the hardware info. It returns the actual hardware info that you would register with the .info at the start of the test. So, but other than that, it's like, you know, getting CPU and get memory info. None of that corresponds to the spec, but it's useful for identifying which hardware info you need.
Okay, so this kind of qualifies as tools necessary or useful to write your diag, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's
so
strictly a requirement. It's going to be a requirement for us to be able to run the diagnostics at Google. So it seems like it would belong in like this area.
Yeah, we should continue this discussion next time. We're out of time today, but I am of the opinion that this does belong here, but maybe we need to label it in a different way. Okay, cool. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.